Hello everyone, Andy here, and here's what you can look forward to in today's episode.
In today's episode, I was joined by the franchise tag's Jonny Bisby as we review the conference championship games. Jonny discusses the call from Sean Payton to go for it on fourth down.
The play call was badly wrong.
And there's one Seahawks player I heap a lot of praise on.
I think he deserves so much credit for that game.
Hope you all enjoy.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Across the Pod NFL podcast. I am, as ever, your host today, Andy Davis, and Super Bowl, the matchup is here as we review the conference championship as the AFC and NFC learned their fate. Now, with me, I've got a returning guest back on the show today, is New York Jets fan, Jonny Bisby, and also part of the franchise tag. Jonny, how are you? How are things?
Andy, thanks so much for having me back on. Yeah, it's the NFL season is coming to its climax, and we've just enjoyed, another dramatic weekend, haven't we? Of action, two fairly different games, and we'll get into it. I'm sure in a bit longer, but yeah, this has been one of the best seasons, I think, from a being a Jets fan. I'm always sort of watching games as a neutral point of view because my team's never really involved. But yeah, it's been full of drama, unpredictability, and the storylines just keep getting stranger by the day. So we really enjoyed this season and can't wait for the big game in just over a week's time.
Yeah, I mean, this season has been one of the best I can remember. The one I sort of came to mind before that was maybe the 2021 season, particularly the playoff season that year. I mean, that's the kind of season that I always think of. I quite enjoyed the 2020 season, even though it was, no fans. But yeah, this season's been really good. A lot of good games. And the thing I found as well that what's made it as good is there hasn't been a clear favourite. It's felt a bit like an EFL championship season in terms of everyone beats each other. There's obviously a few teams to stand out amongst the rest, but they find ways to lose to anyone. So this has been one of the better seasons, I think, for game quality.
Absolutely.
Or the lack of real favourite, but also no Chiefs or Eagles in the Super Bowl.
That's certainly something that's been fairly new, but we've actually been treated to two fairly dominant franchises from certainly the last decade and a half who are returning to the big game. So it's almost, I think, from a like I say, a bit of a neutral point of view. It's not necessarily disappointing that these two great franchises have come back and are now dominating, but yeah, certainly, those teams are the ones that their ownership, their structure, they certainly know how to run franchises. I think at the start of the year, particularly, I think for the Patriots and the Seahawks playing in the Super Bowl, I think if you had picked one, let alone two of those teams to be playing in the Super Bowl, I think a lot of people would have laughed at you. But I think as the year have gone on, we've seen that both of these teams are dominant on both sides of the ball, and I think that was pretty clear, certainly throughout the playoffs and on Sunday. So the unpredictability has been something really, really nice. But I think as it's come down to it, I think probably the two most deserving teams from the season have made it to the game. So that speaks for itself, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you have been living under the rock, it is going to be a Super Bowl featuring the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots. Of course, a repeat of Super Bowl 48, as we all saw what happened then. Sorry, 49, as the Seahawks did lose to the Patriots in the most dramatic fashion with the Malcolm.
One of the greatest NFL games of all time, wasn't it?
I wish I watched this game live. I at this point in time, actually, I don't wish I watched it live because it's the Patriots. But in terms of being an NFL fan, I remember it was on when I was in university, but I was only just getting into it. And sort of at that point, I was just watching highlights. So I kind of, for the drama, it would have been great to have seen it live. You think about the cursed catch as well. That would have been, I think, held a lot more in folklore if they'd won that game, in similar fashion to that Julio Jones catch in Super Bowl 51. This does as well mean that since 2015 season, you've only had one Super Bowl that hasn't had the Chiefs or Patriots. And that was, of course, the Super Bowl 56, where the Cincinnati Bengals won the AFC and took on the LA Rams. And the Rams were almost involved in it, and of course, they lost to the Seahawks. So we almost got a rematch either way. We would have got a rematch of, well, really, if the Broncos had beat the Patriots, it would have been a repeat of Broncos Seahawks, Super Bowl 48. And if the Rams had won and the Patriots had won, well, they did win, it would have been a repeat of two Super Bowls. The Super Bowl 53, which is some think the worst of all time, but also the Super Bowl where the Patriots stunned the greatest show on turf to win their first of their 6 Super Bowl titles. Heading on to our first game, though, it is involving the Patriots as they beat the Broncos in the AFC Championship by 10 points to 7, a very low-scoring affair. Both quarterbacks struggled in conditions that worsened throughout the day. There's a great graphic going on in the moment of how the game started and how the game ended in terms of weather. Start the game, very clear. At the end of the game, snowstorm. It was, and that did play a part into the game. It played a part into the weather. Both quarterbacks had less than 100 yards. I mean, Drake May's stat line here, 10 completed passes from 21 attempts, no touchdowns, and 86 passing yards in the entire game. The Patriots' only touchdown came from a mistake from Jarrett Stidham, who also had a difficult affair. Started off hot, but won that decision to give it as a backwards pass meant that it was given as a Patriots turnover, and they scored the very next play, or at least the few plays after that. Well, Stidham actually had over 100 yards. He had 133 passing yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. But in the end, the Patriots went out supreme as they once again win the AFC for the first time since the 2018 season, when, of course, they beat the Rams. Jonny, first of all, we have to talk about it. There was a point in the game where it was 7-7, and the Broncos were on, I believe, something like the 15-yard line. On 4th down and 1, they went for it with Stidham, and they didn't get it. Fast forward later on in the game, Pats were in a similar situation, and they went for the field goal. And with how the weather turned out that game, that decision for Vrabel to go for it and Payton to not go for it, ultimately, in hindsight, you can argue cost the Broncos, because you can look at it on one hand and think, well, the way it was going, if it went to overtime, the Patriots may have won anyway. But there'll be a lot of people who will be thinking that Payton's decision to go for it on 4th ultimately cost the Broncos.
Yeah, I think there's multiple points in there, because, I think in hindsight, obviously we can say that it was the wrong decision, because it failed, and ultimately because of the weather there was hardly any scoring opportunities following that. I think if we consider the play, in Sean Payton's mind was the right idea, and if it was successful, then everyone's laughing. But I think with a backup quarterback who till that point I think had played as well as you could have hoped, I think the play call was something that was probably the most disappointing element of the call to go for it, because the Patriots obviously flew off the line in blitz. You've got an under pressure quarterback in Stidham, pushed out the pocket, and obviously failed to make a quick pass. I think 4th and 1, the run game was looking okay for the Broncos at that point, and I think in those sort of situations, if you are you want to go for it, you want to put the pressure on, because that there are going to be very few opportunities to score. If you knew about the weather, because I've never watched a game where the conditions have changed so quickly. So I think the ultimately bad point is that the play call was badly wrong, because you fail to put the quarterback, who is very highly under pressure, in the best position to make that play. I think if they had made the field goal, as we saw, the Patriots didn't obviously scored the field goal afterwards, but after that, there was no team except for the Broncos looked likely to score. And I think ultimately it does come down to that play in the second quarter, given what we now know. I think there's conversations to be had about how much the Broncos knew about the conditions, and how and when they were going to change, because like I say, it was fairly late in the second quarter, and if they'd made that play and the snow had come as it did, then yeah, they're in much better position to to progress. So Payton, was afterwards, he was clearly saying, I wanted it to be 14-0 and give us the best opportunity. But yeah, I think fundamentally it was poor game management, and I think putting your quarterback, who is has only played a handful of snaps in that game, hasn't played for the whole year, is very I think under pressure. I think it was just a really poor play call, and that ultimately played a big part in contributing towards the final result.
Yeah, 100%. Because yeah, it might have been 10-10. It might have been in overtime, and the Patriots may have won, but at least they would have been involved in overtime. You get the ball first, or you give the ball to them first, and you can make a stop. And with the way the defense is playing, they could have easily got a forced fumble, strip sack, interception, pick six. That I think it's that saying of as long as you're in the raffle, you got a chance of winning it. And I think if they'd got the game to overtime, and obviously they both missed field goals from around about the 40, 35, 40-yard line, both Borregales and Mollett. So the chance were there to kick a field goal to win the game, or at least tie it for them. But you kind of think in that moment as well, there's a whole saying about Sean Payton was trusting his defense, but then where the ball roughly was, 9 times out of 10, if they got the kick, got it down and kicked it back to the Patriots, whether they'd called the fair catch or whether they let it go out into the end zone, or whether they'd run out with it and been tackled, 9 times out of 10, that is going roughly to where that ball was anyway. So for me, exactly. I don't get it, because at the 2-yard line, I get it, because it's safety chance, especially in those conditions, and being the home team. But I think the position they were going for on fourth down, and where ultimately got turned over and the Patriots started their drive, would be the same point where they would have had the ball anyway, the Patriots. So for me, it just seemed in that situation, like you said, a backup quarterback, it just seems crazy to me that you don't just take the points. I mean, I
was just going to say that's the most confusing point, I think, is because you are, as the Broncos have been for much of this season and much of the playoffs, and particularly in this game, been so reliant on the defense. That they are going to play the major part, I think, in this game, and you don't want to put your backup quarterback in those sort of situations. Building points and taking them whenever they're off, I think is ultimately what we thought the game plan was going to be for the Broncos. And in the second half, obviously the missed opportunities, the weather played probably the main part in not being able to take them. But there were certainly a couple of times, a couple of field goals, particularly the last one, obviously, which we saw was tipped rather than the weather playing part. I think you've got to take those chances. It's easy to look in hindsight, but I think fundamentally it was a wrong call to go for it on that down.
100%, and I think there'll be a lot of teams looking back this season with how the AFC was played this year, with a lot of what ifs. I think the Bills certainly will look at it as a chance to, they could. I think they would have fancied their chances in those conditions. I think the Jaguars would have fancied their chances of beating both teams with how their defense is playing most of the year. But I think the Broncos will always wonder what if. I think, because I think we'll see the Chiefs back in a couple of years' time. I don't see a world where if you've got Burrow and Chase, at some point you don't return to that stage. Ravens new head coach, that could be the new voice they need to go far. So there's a lot of teams that were missing this year from the AFC playoffs that will be back. And I feel like there's a chance there, a real big chance for a lot of teams in that AFC to make the Super Bowl this year. And I think the Patriots, whilst they're also one of those teams, I don't believe they'll come back next year. I do believe, I said it multiple times on the pod, I don't believe that they are they've had a hard route to the Super Bowl. I think they've had the easiest route in history. And yeah,
we're clutching at straws, aren't we? As AFC rivals, we don't want them to succeed at all, do we?
No, it still has been a ridiculously.
It has.
I agree. You think about the team; they've only had 2 teams that have any record, only 3 teams in the playoffs. 4 to 5 first teams picking in the draft in next year played the Patriots this season. You had, you played a backup quarterback in the AFC Championship game. You think about even Patriots teams in the past having to go to Arrowhead to play Mahomes. You think about the Bengals being 20-odd points down to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. You think about the Bills constantly having to go to Arrowhead and constantly lose to Mahomes. And they get to play a backup quarterback who hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, that for me, that is quite something. And I do believe next year, the schedule, we mentioned it on the previous show with Shane Brennan, that the schedule they got next year as a result of being division winners is pretty hard. So
yeah,
I think all teams in the AFC this year had a one chance to get in, and fair play to the Patriots. I've got to give them some praise because someone's got to be involved, and they're the ones that were the best team. They were second seed as well. So yeah, I've got to give them some praise, and I've got to give Christian Gonzalez a lot of praise in this game. I think he was, for me, the standout player. I think you think about how they managed to stop the Patriots, led the game in tackles with 5, had a sack and had the crucial interception late on in the game, which I think it was something like 2 minutes 18 left, did help ultimately seal the game for them. So I think, obviously, we'll get your prediction later on at the end of the show for your Super Bowl prediction your Super Bowl score prediction. But I think if they're going to win this game, and we obviously are going to mention it in our Super Bowl preview, but I think that defense will be a reason why the Patriots could win this game. I do believe that it's a defense that has caused problems for teams. He's given Stroud and Herbert nightmares and ultimately won this game for the Patriots. So yeah, the Patriots, for me, they got a chance. They've got a chance to win the Super Bowl. Obviously, I will give my prediction as well for the score. But yeah, I think that defense, if they're going to win this game, it is down to that defense, personally, for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's continued to impress throughout. As the season has gone on, particularly in this playoffs, they, I think, have now allowed the second fewest points in the 3 playoff games that they played in NFL's history. I think only behind the 2000 Ravens, who obviously famously went on to win the Super Bowl that year. And yeah, I think like you say, Christian Gonzalez had the big important play, with the interception, and I think the defense, because of the conditions, it obviously favors I think the defense, but at the same time, I think we all know that to be able to stream up defensive plays is so much harder than offense, even, and in the chaos that I think ensued in Denver, it must have been incredibly difficult being on that field, and they held their nerve, made some incredible plays, not just defense, but special teams. Obviously, the kick and being able to back up those, the missed punts as well, didn't allow any opportunities for the Broncos. So they've got some brilliant players. Milton Williams, who's come in this year, has been incredibly dominant. Obviously, what the other big turning point in the game was Christian Ellis forcing the fumble pass from Stidham, which obviously led to the touchdown. They were able to stifle the run game, which ultimately was the Broncos' only real hope because of the change at quarterback. After starting the game with that long pass from Stidham, I think it was the 3rd or 4th play, and the touchdown, went down 7-0 fairly early on in the game. They regrouped, and they've got an incredible defensive mind in Mike Vrabel, and the people that he has around him. The culture in New England is, annoyingly, we said this 5 years ago at the end of the break, and we've said it for so many years. But this team is, annoyingly for us too, just such a winning built franchise. They expect to win, and their expectations is to go on and achieve multiple Super Bowls. I'm sure with this group and Drake May, who's becoming even more of a legend, didn't necessarily have to do or couldn't do it, an awful lot in this game. And that will certainly be different in the Super Bowl. But on the clutch play, right at the end of 3rd and 6, which and I saw this stat, he is by far the worst quarterback in the NFL at the moment on specific 3rd and 6 plays. His completion rate is I think less than 50%. I mean, I don't know how many. I can't remember how many 3rd and 6 plays he's played this year. But on that specific play where I suppose the pressure's a bit on, he was able to scramble and seal the game ultimately for the Patriots. So they more than have a chance. They're obviously in the Super Bowl, and they have a team that is obviously very young. This is only May's second year of the first year for Matt Brable, and this coaching setup. So a lot of new players as well. They have a real opportunity to cement themselves and perhaps, I don't know, develop themselves into building towards. I'm not going to say dynasty again, but a team that's going to be dominant, I think, in the AFC for years to come.
I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe it. I mean, again, I still think that schedule's been kind to them. I still think that when you get to that schedule,
they've able to. The playoffs are the best teams from this year. I think and they've navigated through. It doesn't matter. We can talk about who they have played and who they haven't played, but ultimately they, in knockout competition, they have beaten everyone else. The NFC has obviously been, I think a bit more competitive this year in terms of, I suppose, the quality that we've seen. But I think the narrative that the Patriots don't deserve to be there because of who they played, I think is, and we can, next year, like you say, they may only win 3 or 4 games. Let's hope on that. But yeah, I think they're so deserving to be here. And Drake May, I think, is possibly the most likable quarterback in the NFL, annoyingly, because of, I think, his character is very humble and very down to earth. And I think, MVP quarterback who I think has left everything on the field in every game he's played. So I'll be quiet now. I'll stop bigging up the Patriots because it's too random and just thinking about it.
No, I mean, to be fair, like I've been slating them quite a lot, and but I do want to put out there to all the Patriots fans who've been in my DMs recently. Actually, they are there for a reason. So someone's got to win it, and they've been the best team to do it. I just think that, I've mentioned my points before. I won't go into them again. But no, fair play to them. You've got to give them credit. And Mike Vrabel, I mean, a guy who has reached the AFC Championship with the Titans, had a #1 seed in the AFC a few years later, had a disastrous game against the Bengals from quarterback Tannehill. But you think about him. First of all, the whole thing on draft night, the team decided to trade away AJ Brown. And he was Bisby not happy with that, and within a year or two he was let go by the Titans, and then he had a year where no one wanted him. Now I don't know whether there was a factor of I'll wait for the Patriots job to come available. I don't know, but you think about that year when no one tried to get him, but also the fact that Titans got rid of him, they must be feeling horrendous amount of remorse as a franchise. I mean, the fact that Titans fans wanted him gone, I know a lot of fan bases, when they were trying to have a new head coach, were saying we don't want him to be there. I think everyone's been proved wrong. He has done a great job turning this team, who had back-to-back 4-win seasons, turning them into AFC champions, Super Bowl appearance. Fair play to Mike Vrabel. I think for me, he is very, very worthy, and for me personally, should be the favourite to win Coach of the Year.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that, looking at the Titans head coaching hire this season in in Robert Sala. I think there are fair similarities. Obviously, Sala's nowhere near as successful as Mike Vrabel, but Vrabel is a leader of men. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he's someone the both been in the NFL. You'd absolutely love to play for someone like Mike Vrabel, and that's clearly the case. The Titans, I think, it'd gone sour, and I think Vrabel. Well, obviously glad now he's had the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl with the Patriots, but almost I think just needed a bit of a restart. But they probably shouldn't have never let him leave the building. He's clearly an incredible coach and an incredible leader, and he's going to be the head coach, I think, for the New York Patriots for a long time, and certainly competing right at the top end of the NFL while he's there.
Well, breaking news: the Patriots have moved to New York. That's a breaking news on the show.
I wish.
Let's head on to our second game, the NFC Championship, as the Seahawks beat the Rams by 31-27. A much better affair to watch as a neutral. A game that saw no interceptions, saw a combined total of 6 passing touchdowns from both quarterbacks. We saw a game which had 219 receiving yards from 19 receptions between Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Not a single pick thrown as well. We saw a game which had the leading tackle for the Rams had 11 tackles, 8 for the Seahawks. So this was a game I thought had everything. It was a game that it was sort of, you saw defensive strength, but also you saw the strength of the offense. And in the end, it is the Seahawks that advance. And for them, it's their fourth Super Bowl appearance and their first since that aforementioned Malcolm Butler interception in the 2014 season. And they obviously go in as the favourites for the game. And I want to sort of, first of all, before we get on to kind of the offensive side of things, the Seahawks almost weren't there. They almost weren't there because there was a point in the game. It was late on in the third quarter. There was a third down for the Rams, and there was a deflected pass from the Seahawks to Tariq Woolen, which was sort of hit him up against Puka Nacua in coverage. And that was kind of a theme for a lot of the game was him on Nacua, and he gets the third down deflected pass. They were going to go punt it away, but then lo and behold, the Seahawks give away a 15-yard penalty, an automatic first down given to the Rams after Tariq Woolen was found to be taunting the Rams bench. And literally, next play, Rams Stafford throws to Nacua, touchdown. And at that point, I think a lot of Seahawks fans, and I really want to get the thoughts of our Seahawks fan and our Super Bowl preview, because at that point, I was thinking, if the Rams win this game, it's because of him. It's not down to anything Sam Darnold's done or anything down to what the running back has done, Kenneth Walker. At that point, I believe there was a point where the Rams made it, I think, less than a 7-point game. In the end, that thankfully for him, he didn't cost them. But that taunting penalty could, at that point in the game as well, late on in the third quarter, that could have so easily cost the Seahawks.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of Seahawks fans about this week, and Rick Wallen is a player who I think since his rookie season has, he has regressed a little bit as a free agent this year, and I think this play is, a very rare mental mistake from any of the Seahawks defense this year, but it's just stupid is the word. And like you say, if this had cost his team, I couldn't imagine being one of his teammates. And we saw, I think, Nick Enwanyuri going absolute berserk to him, after the very next play, which went for a touchdown. I just don't understand it, and I'd be very surprised if Woolen is a Seahawk, next year. I think this, because of how highly they regard their defensive structure, and obviously, this wasn't part of the play. This was something that happened afterwards. But that's what makes it so much more shocking and stupid, is because the NFL has been very cutthroat about taunting over the last couple of years. It's a crucial part of the game. Do not, under any circumstances, give them any opportunity, the refs to potentially penalise you for your behaviour. So, I think it all unfortunately says, a lot about, one's character, perhaps. I think, I don't want to speak ill of people, but it's one that's childish, and I just don't think the Seahawks, for how they play and how aggressive they are on defense. But they need discipline, and if this had cost them, this would have been the biggest talking point, I think, of the game. It's one of those which is very stupid. But let's hope in the Super Bowl, if he plays, that he can make amends and have a good game. But if I was a teammate or a supporter of the Seahawks, I would still be absolutely livid at Fulham, because I think this game was ultimately decided on mistakes. Both teams, and this included, had gave opportunities to the other team to score and ultimately win. Thankfully for the Seahawks, it cost them in that moment, but it didn't ultimately cost them the game. Certainly just an unnecessary thing to happen, particularly in such a close game.
Absolutely, I think they're playing so well. The game, I don't think they were ever behind at any point in the game, and I think that that point you were starting to think, oh, could the tide turn? I think especially when the Clara caught the touchdown pass, the very next play, I did think at that point, or I could just see how it was going to go. But thankfully for them, it didn't matter too much. And this is obviously a great day as well for the UK NFL fans, because you've got a first ever time in NFL history, a British coordinator in a Super Bowl. Aidan Derd, of course, formerly of the likes of the Falcons and the Cowboys, is now getting head coaching talks. I think the Browns are being seen as the team most likely to go for him, which is maybe why they haven't appointed anyone at the moment as their new head coach. So yeah, this is a good thing. I think as well for UK fans, and unless you're a fan of the Rams or the Niners, Niners may want the Rams to win, the Seahawks to win more than the Rams. I don't know, but I think if you're not involved in the NFC West as a fan, I think personally, if you got two teams, one team who last played the Super Bowl 2021, and a team who last played in the Super Bowl 2015 or 2014 season, and they got a British coordinator, I think personally, there was, for me personally, a clear favourite who I wanted to win on that day. But also, even going further now, I think there'll be a lot of UK fans, not just because it's the Patriots and how much they're disliked across the league by fans. I think the fact that you got someone British, and properly British as well, like not someone who was born there and lived in America all their lives. This guy is from London. He's lived there all his life, and he has now got the chance to have. I think a lot of people in the UK are going to be rooting for the Seahawks for that reason as well. So yeah, it's very exciting for us UK fans, and obviously I'll be going out to Super Bowl in a few days, as I'm sure you're all aware by now as listeners. I'm hoping to be able to have a chance to speak to him and obviously get a UK standpoint on the game. Now, one thing that didn't cost the Seahawks at all was Sam Darnold, who we were very conservative about going into the game on the preview show. Sam Darnold has saved his best performance of his career for this game. It was an amazing performance. Looking at his stat line, I mentioned before, no interceptions. He had 3 touchdowns passing, 346 passing yards as well, a quarterback rating of 127.8. Sam Darnold, and I did a video on it as well about how he's overcome a lot of problems. And of course, Jonny, you know full well, how much he struggled in New York, and how much is this an example of not only sort of the hard work pays off and the resilience pays off and all that, but also the right situation. If you're in the wrong situation, you're never going to succeed. But if you're in the right situation, you can ultimately succeed.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Sam Darnold, absolutely fair play to him. I'm very, very happy that he's found a home and is having so much success in the league. I think I can say this with ease now, but I think at the time, obviously, the Jets picking Zach Wilson over Sam Darnold was an incredible mistake, and I think a fair few people knew that at the time. Moving on from someone who I think had shown progress, I think, at the time, but not necessarily obviously being on a team where he was surrounded by poor play, and we've always known that Sam Darnold, he was dominant in college. He's been great for the Vikings and the Seahawks, and like you say, I think in the last couple of games has played at that MVP style level. He's had setbacks, and I think there's a lot of talk around him having to earn his stripes. Similar to what Baker Mayfield obviously went through. They've had similar sort of paths to find success, but I think from the first drive on Sunday, that explosive play to Rashid Shaheed on what was the second or third pass that he made. He does throw those explosive passes, but I think during the regular season we saw him throwing those will go for interceptions rather than necessarily completion. So he's finally clicking, big plays I think are starting to look very likely when Sam Darnold's got the ball on his throw into he's got an incredible receiver group, probably the best defensive line in the NFL. So he's been put into the perfect situation with a defense backing him up. But yeah, he's massively improved, but he's always had that talent, and I think that's something people have to realize about the situations that similar quarterbacks are in. They've got to be given time, but they've also got to be it's easy to say, but they've got to be in a scenario which is geared up for their success. And just on social media sort of this week and looking at who potentially is in that similar sort of mold. I was watching some highlights of Will Levis, who has completely fallen off a cliff of the Titans, and not sure where he's going to end up. But we know that there's some sort of talent in there. I'm wondering if I'm not saying that Will Levis could lead a team to the Super Bowl, but putting those players in situations like Sam Darnold has, I wonder if the result is something very similar. But yeah, for the Jets, they'll also be kicking themselves. The Vikings as well. Letting him walk out the door last year, I think, is a real point. I think they could have perhaps been in a similar situation to the Seahawks this year if they'd kept hold of them. Very similar sort of teams. But yeah, I think the Seahawks on both sides of the ball, just incredibly dominant. We've spoken so much about the defense this year, but on that offensive line, how good did Kenneth Walker play? We know he's got that sort of game in him. Smith and Jigba, insanely good. Shaheed alongside and Cooper Kupp. For Sam Darnold, everything set up perfectly for him. He's got one of the most complete teams in the NFL. Fair play to him. He's part of a big part of let's not forget of this team, and he's certainly I think one of the premier NFL quarterbacks at the moment and going into next year.
Yeah, the Vikings, the Jets you can understand because he wasn't playing that well there, and the same thing with the Panthers. And hindsight's a great thing, but for the Vikings, you just see how good he was last year. I know obviously the last 2 games probably had some sort of impact on that. The fact that he did play so badly in the divisional round, in the wild card round, and then the final game of the regular season against the Lions. But I just think about as well the fact that the whole reason he was brought in the first place was to be a bridge quarterback to JJ McCarthy. He can learn off him, and also McCarthy goes down injured. Darnold comes in, but I kind of thinking, surely that this season would have been basically what they wanted to do last season, because the whole point they have if they wanted to play McCarthy straight away, they wouldn't have bothered getting Darnold in. They would have got a lesser backup. They would have started McCarthy week 1. I think they might have done it anyway. But for me, it just seemed crazy that the fact they brought him in was for him to play ahead of McCarthy and McCarthy to learn behind him. And he's had a year injured. You can't think, and surely this season was basically what last season they wanted to do. So I don't see why they didn't bring him in again for the similar sort of deal. And they've thrust McCarthy in. He hasn't been great really, apart from that week 1 performance in the fourth quarter. And you kind of thinking, why didn't they just go for what they had planned last year? For me personally, I think, whilst I think there's probably a better O-line at the Seahawks and stuff like that, I kind of thinking if he was there, they'd at least made the playoffs, if not done what the Seahawks did. So, but instead the Seahawks are the ones that made it in, and their former quarterback was probably the worst quarterback of the lot in Geno Smith this year. So I think the Seahawks by far won that deal, and the Vikings, I think, once again will be kicking themselves at this decision.
Yeah, I mean the first round pick quarterback element weighs so heavily on teams. I think not just making the decision, but once they have it, and I think that ultimately a similar thing in Atlanta. I think Kirk Cousins obviously wasn't playing anywhere near as well as Sam Darnold, but as Penix stepped up and adjusted. Obviously not. I think in the scenario for the Vikings, I think just probably from a political point of view internally, felt they had to show that they made the right decision in taking McCarthy, and I can imagine there's so much politics involved in that decision, because I think they knew when letting Sam Darnold leave, we all predicted he was going to be the top quarterback in that free agency class. Did people expect him to be going to the Super Bowl? I'm not so sure, but he's an upgrade on at least 60-70% of the quarterbacks playing in the league. So yeah, it's just so confusing letting someone like that leave, particularly when quarterbacks are so scarce and in demand. A strange decision, but I think there'll be. I'd love to have been a fly in the room of the ownership. I think the general management in Minnesota on that one.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'd love to have been involved in that. Before we do go on to your prediction, I want to quickly just praise Devon Witherspoon in this game, because at the point in the game where he got beat a few times, remember there was a quite a big game from Devontae Adams where he I think Witherspoon slipped. But then when he got to late on in the game in that fourth quarter, there was the Rams' final 2 drives. The first drive, 3rd down stop on Adams, 4th down. Firstly, the Rams went, but they didn't go for the field goal. He stopped the 4th down catch then. And in the final drive as well, on the very final play, he's the one who tackled the Nakua inbound. So, yeah, Devon Witherspoon, who I think has been great since joining the league, I think he deserves so much credit for that game, because I think without him, the Rams may have easily, got the yards they needed to go for the Hail Mary more and just potentially won that game with a one final play. So Witherspoon, I've got to give him so much praise. Right, Jonny, time for you to predict your Super Bowl winner and also your MVP. Now, I'm going to give my prediction in our Super Bowl preview, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, Jonny, what is the score going to be in Super Bowl 60?
Oh, difficult one. The Seahawks are the fairly heavily favourites, actually. I think they're about a 5-point favourite at the moment. And, if you're looking purely on this weekend, you can assume that the Patriots struggled against the Broncos, whereas the Seahawks were able to dominate a little bit offensively. So I will take the Seahawks. I think, and Sam Darnold is the MVP. I'm not sure about 5 points, but certainly I think it'll be a very close game. I think it's whoever scores the most points ultimately. Do I think it's going to be a shootout? I'm not so sure. Let's go for something like 24-20 to the Seahawks, win by 4. I think they've got the better team. I think positionally, I think man for man, the Seahawks are more dominant.
Fair enough. And that is where we will end the show for today. So, Jonny, first of all, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Enjoy the Super Bowl, mate. You're going to have such an amazing time out there. Do send us some pictures, and I hope we get to speak to a lot of players and stuff. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. I can't wait to watch it.
Oh, thank you, mate. Can't wait. I'm trying to think of maybe who's the one person I'd love to interview from either game. I think probably Sam Darnold, just because of his story. I would love to ask him about that. And to be honest, I'd like to maybe interview Witherspoon after the pros I've just given him. I've got the perfect thing to talk to him about in my questions. So yeah, looking forward to it. Obviously it's not got the stars maybe of like Mahomes and Kelsey last year, but either way it's going to be great. And of course I'll be staying for a few days with friend of the show Sky Pank. We obviously got Shane Brennan down there as well, another friend of the show. Going with him to Alcatraz, for example. Many more friends of the show are going to be there. For example, Will Varney from TalkSport is going to be there, as well as all the rest of the TalkSport lads like Will Gavin. So yeah, exciting times, and I cannot wait to get on our flight Friday morning, finish work on the Thursday, and just hope that I can. There's no delays in my flight, and I can get in okay. So yeah, they're all looking forward to that. But yeah. And obviously, as I said before, stay tuned on the show, on the podcast socials for all the content that week. But in the meantime, this has been the Across the Pod NFL podcast. I have been, as ever, your host today, Andy Davis, with our guest in the franchise tags, Jonny Bisby. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.